Hello everyone, welcome into CMS Connected, the web content management industry's only news show. Glad you guys could join us today because we've got a big show all about big data. Welcome in, I'm your host Tyler Pybert, and of course, as always, taking us through this entire show, we welcome in Scott Lewer, the co-host of the show as well. Scott, how you doing?
I'm good today, Tyler. How are you?
Very good. We've got a big show on big data, really.
We've got a big show on big data. That's good. Absolutely. Yes, we do.
That's the way we're going to continue to set it up. Now, also, joining us in just a few minutes, we're going to have Frank Gilbane from Bluebill Advisors, and a little later on in the show, we're going to have Robert Rose, also of Digital Clarity Group. And now, before we begin, we always have to acknowledge the great sponsors that help put on this show, CMS Connect. We have to first thank Falcon Software. Falcon provides web creative, e-commerce, content management, social media, and mobile solutions for organizations across the globe, as well as Digital Clarity Group. DCG is a research and advisory firm focused on navigating organizations through the digital transformation process. All right, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's start this thing off with some of the news segments that we want to talk about throughout the CMS industry in general. And to kick things off, let's start with Gartner's WCM Magic Quadrant for 2012. I know all of you have been anxiously waiting this topic for sure. Gartner has released its Magic Quadrant for web content management, and no surprises with changes of leaders: Oracle, Adobe, SDL, Sitecore, OpenText, HP. With one exception, taking a quick look back at the list last year, it's clear that the leaders are solidified, and it will take some pretty bold moves, Scott, for any newcomer to get into the quadrant. Yet, interestingly enough, Ectron has been able to do that. So, Scott, with all things considered, is it a surprise really with Ectron being added, and what are your thoughts just in general on this year's quadrant?
Sure. So generally, I think, look, the quadrant is what it is. I don't think there are many surprises in the quadrant from year over year. That's one of the things that I feel like I have as a challenge with it, is that as the industry changes, sometimes relatively significantly from vendor to vendor, we don't see much movement in the quadrant. Even when there's consolidations or acquisitions, that kind of stuff, we don't tend to see too much movement. And I think that, to be honest, that's a part of the model. It certainly isn't necessarily their desire, but it's almost set up to be that way. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think that's relevant to the Ectron story too, which we'll get to in a second. So there's two axes to the quadrant, right? So the vertical axis is the ability to execute. Typically, the way that they define that is it's basically the size of the company and the wherewithal that they have, the people, the resources, the money to basically be able to kind of continue to put out solutions and to continue to innovate. The horizontal axis is the completeness of vision, and that's more around the innovation. What are you doing in this area, whatever the quadrant is covering, in this case, in the web content management segment, and how far are you kind of pushing the envelope into contemporary? The other element that goes in that's kind of the unspoken part of that vertical axis and how you move up, right, is from a visionary, for example, which is the bottom right of the quadrant, up into the leader quadrant, which is what Ectron did, is it's not just your size, but it's also how often the analyst gets asked about you, right, by the CIOs who they're in touch with 4, 5, 6 of them per day, right? So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that essentially, if I put you in a leader quadrant, then my customers, my CIOs, me being Gartner analyst, then my customers who are CIOs are going to ask me naturally about those companies. And so therefore, if I'm going to give people a grade about you stay in the visionary quadrant, if I get asked about you, then you're not going anywhere. Likely also, anybody who's on the cusp, at least vertically, of getting into the quadrant, like Ectron was, they were just below the line, people are going to naturally ask a fair amount about them too. Should I also be considering them as I'm just kind of spatially considering the...
That raises them as well, continue. So what I want you to do right now is get to the point from an analyst perspective. Do you even care about it? I mean, honestly.
About the quadrant?
The quadrant.
You can't not care about the quadrant.
Okay.
Right? And so from a purity perspective, do I think that they judge things most appropriately? No. Do I think they're on the pulse of where innovation is going? No. Is it relevant, though? Hugely. And is it relevant to Ectron? Their revenues are going to probably skyrocket because of that millimeter of movement, because
Just crossing that
CIOs,
line,
rightly
yeah.
or wrongly, are creating their short list of companies to look at specifically by by looking at the quadrant. So I think, admittedly, they're not on the pulse of kind of where things are going, no pun intended, where things are going necessarily, because it's about when they're being asked about it.
Okay.
It's CIOs who tend to be more laggards, who are adopting technology kind of late. They're waiting for the way to be paved for them, and they're coming in and asking. So what does this say about Ectron? I think it means a lot that they're over to the right. I think they are innovative. I think they're doing great things. I think their platform is moving in a great direction. But frankly, they've had some hiccups over the past year, which is kind of the surprising part. They've gotten rid of some workforce. Their revenue has gone down because of that. They've made a change in direction strategically with services. So you wouldn't think that would actually move them up vertically, but rather down.
So it is a surprise. I mean, in the long run, it is a bit of a surprise.
It's
for
a
sure.
surprise that they're there, but not if you say that one of the big, huge elements to moving up vertically is
How
if
many
I get
times you're
asked about you. If I put you really close to being there, of course I'm going to get asked about you as the analyst. It's just silly, which is why we don't see much movement. HP, whether they're good or they're bad, doesn't move anywhere because they're constantly asked about because they're there. So it just doesn't.
So once you're there, I mean, there's a lot of
you're
staying
not going
power. You're
anywhere
not going
unless you sell out. Unless you
Yeah.
leave the space. You're not going anywhere ever. Period.
Interesting.
So-
All right. So one of the things we do want to move on to the very next topic, and I want to talk about WordPress right now. It's as a content management system, everybody likes to debate this back and forth now. Is it just a blogging platform? Is it a CMS? However, according to a growing number of users, with the right plugins, WordPress can be also set up as a very affordable CMS solution. So what do you see some of the core advantages, Scott, and drawbacks for that matter, of WordPress as a SMB WCM solution? I mean, first start off with the advantages. What are the good things about utilizing WordPress as a content management system?
Yeah. First of all, we should define what SMB is, right? If we talk about small, medium business, there are plenty of people who are out there self-identifying as I'm a small or medium business, and I might in that case have, I don't know, $10 million of revenue, for example, or I might self-categorize as a small and medium business, and I'm just getting started out, and I'm saying they're
Your mom
from
and pop,
the
you're down
small
the street,
label.
yeah.
There's a very big difference. Even 100 million might be considered SMB in many cases.
Yeah.
So there's a huge variation for who's there. That being said, advantages are obviously it's low barrier to entry. I can spin up a site really easily. I've got themes and all kinds of stuff. I can make my site look pretty professional pretty darn quickly. I can manage a lot of content, not a lot of types of content, but volume-wise, a lot of content pretty easily. The question is about maturity of that content and what I need to do and how many people are participating in that management. That's where you start to get into some of the complexities.
Okay, I was going to say, talk about the drawbacks from that standpoint. I mean, what are some of those complexities a little bit more? I mean, you mentioned from the management side, it's great. Like you said, we see plenty of people pop up a WordPress site. You see their site, it looks good because they purchased a theme for $35, and there you go, they're ready to roll. But what about from the drawbacks of managing the content, actually?
I should say, too, that one of the obvious positives that any WordPress person would point out is the plethora of modules that you can pull in from the community. And the tens of thousands of them, I think, are available. So if it doesn't do it, quote unquote, out of the box, somebody else has innovated and created some capability for you to do whatever it might be, whether that's as simple as connecting to Twitter or that's as advanced as a small level workflow. So on the downsides is that I think it's all based on this kind of hierarchy of needs, right? That typically when we don't have something or we have no way to kind of get our site up and going, then anything is great for us. But then as we mature, as we work our way into that and meet the end of that needs, then we quickly want to go to the next level. If you watch this show, you know a lot about, we've talked about personalization, we've talked about globalization. Today we're going to talk about how to use big data and personas, and all of that stuff is about this idea of creating this audience-centric experience. You will get none of that, I would say, through WordPress. Or rather, you have to really kludge it. It's a very page-based system. I'd have to create a different entirely set of pages for you as for me and have some way to say, show you that or show you that. It's not a dynamic kind of in real time when you come to the site. I can figure out who you are. I can take some information here. I can pull some content from there and pull you up a virtual page. It's not anywhere near
So
that.
when companies hire you And they always ask about WordPress because they say they had someone that said, hey, someone told me there's this free thing called WordPress out there. What's your initial reaction to them?
Well, companies that hire me typically aren't looking at WordPress, right? Okay. Because they tend to be the much smaller companies. I think the folks that are in the larger enterprises where WordPress might be being used is when you've got large dispersed marketing teams and the kind of satellite marketing teams or the local ones are waiting in this big, huge queue because companies have bought these big, hard-to-use systems and they've created this overabundance of governance and everything is completely centralized. And so, they basically have forced it such that you've got to, you're hell-bent to be able to get anything up on the site or up onto the web content management system. And so they take things into their own hands and they go and they kind of go rogue. So they go off the central system and they go spin up their own WordPress site. Those are the ones that are kind of in the enterprise are looking at a WordPress site. So I'm not going to go and say like it's not a CMS, it is a CMS. That's not the question that you're asking. I think it's a question that's been out there for a while and I've written articles about it as well and gotten lots of hate mail from it. But not commenting on that, it's certainly appropriate for managing some types of content, but anything with a level of maturity above and beyond kind of an individual contributor or even a couple of contributors. At DCG, for example, we use it. And already, with the few number of folks that we have, we run into each other all the time. I'm editing an article, they're editing an article. Oh crap, okay, who's gonna hit the save button? And we get to use your stuff. I'll go put my stuff in after you're finished. I mean, there's just some levels of maturity that it just doesn't have.
Okay, excellent. And if you do want to send any sort of hate mail, make sure you utilize that hashtag CMS Connected. We actually would love to see you guys utilize that as well. But let's move on. Let's go to the next news item. News item number 3, and we're gonna talk about on September 20th, Barry Levine, contributing author to CMS Wire, posted the article Gap Widens Between Strategy and Successful Execution, which was based on a report from project management training company ESI International. Now, in the report, actually, research showed that 90% of well-formulated strategies fail because of poor execution, and a survey of Fortune 500 executives found that while 82% felt their organizations could effectively plan strategy, only 14% thought they were effective on implementation. Scott, really, what does this report accurately reflect the WCM project strategy versus deployment success rate, really?
So the call to action, meaning let's focus on implementation, I'm so in line with that, it's not even funny. I mean, that's something that at DCG we've really taken to heart. We're making sure we're doing vendor selections, we're looking at the services group that's going to do it, because I really think that that's 75% of your ultimate solution, right? So I don't want to at all argue the premise. However, the challenge I have with this particular study is that it's talking to executives, number one, who all say that they're great at strategy. So 90% of them say they're great at strategy. I would challenge that and say a lot of poor implementations are the result of a lack of strategy in the first place. But no executive that you poll is going to say, yeah, I stink at my job, which is to create the strategy and direction for us. It's those guys who are executing that stink. Of course they're going to say that. So I have a challenge with that. I don't think the disparity is so large. I will say that, I think we've had a quote from Gartner before in a past show that 65% of projects in the CMS business fail or something like that.
Rapid fire, I think 2 months ago.
Yeah, so I don't know what the numbers are exactly there, but definitely a high percentage of them would easily by 2/3 fail. I just don't think it's all on execution. I think strategy is a big fault of it as well.
I was going to say, it's a big portion. I mean, there's a lot of contributing factors. I think that's the big thing to point out about it. It's not one or the other, really, right? I mean, it has to be all of the above in a sense.
Correct. So it's, that gap between, a quote-unquote effective strategy, as it said, and, ability to implement that strategy, I don't think is as wide as that. That being said, I think that, what strategy is it can't be at the level of we need a web content management system to enable our digital marketing capabilities. It's got to be at a level lower than that. It's got to be contextual with what else you've got in the environment. It's got to be contextual with the personnel that you've got in place. It's got to be contextual with the organizational challenges that you're going to have, whether it's as frankly simple, and it's not simple, but as training through to kind of complete culture change that you've got, talking about people, looking at the web as more than just a brochure reflection of what they do. So that strategy has got to be at a bit of a lower level. Then, okay, let's presume now we've got that. Now at the level of implementation, it's when you're going and looking for a vendor to help you with. Number one, have you even been able to gather your own requirements appropriately? Do you know the processes in your organization that are going to be affected by this? All those sorts of things. And then it's very easy to go find a piece of technology these days. We've talked about Gartner, we've talked about lots of information about there about how to help you make that decision. Very little about helping you make a decision for who is an expert in that, right? Who can help you lead your organization through this? I think very difficult to go find that. So people bite off what they can, and that's something that they leave for a little bit later.
Okay, excellent. So the next thing I want to do is I want to touch upon, well, you mentioned the DCG blog being based on WordPress. So I basically want to go to that right now, because on August 27th, Kyle Dover posted an article on the DCG website called "Selecting the Best Product Without Testing Execution is a Futile Exercise." Now, in the article, Kyle Dover states that technology buyers often ask, how do you know which vendor to trust when they're all saying the exact same thing? We're the best, award-winning, industry-leading, state-of-the-art, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Dover actually goes on to say, quote, "Without effective execution, nothing else matters, not features and functions, not years of experience, nothing." Now, because of without effective execution, no business value is created, no matter how wonderful the product actually appears to be. Do you agree with that statement, Scott?
So I certainly agree with it, and I.
Well, you have to, right? I was going to say, if you disagree with it right now, you're going against your own
We have
self,
a
but
problem.
keep going, yeah.
No, we should have Kyle on here because Kyle is an expert in performance management. We specifically brought him into DCG because of our focus on services and on the agencies who help to make all this stuff happen. If we're going to talk about CXM or customer experience management as this conglomerate of a whole bunch of stuff and more parts of your organization and all that, then performance management, services management, all that kind of stuff is really important. So it's the part that I left out of the last piece because I didn't want to take away from this. But what he talks about there is not only having metrics and how you're going to judge, what's effective production, what's effective performance, not only of the outcome of what you're trying to implement, but also of the folks in the team who are going to help to get you there. How are you going to judge whether or not you're off track? What are going to be some of your early indicators? How are you going to manage the conflicts that come up in every single project, right? You have a whole lot of infighting going on at the top about who owns this project and all that. You got to figure out a way to work that out because that's what paves the way for the project team to come through. And oftentimes the project itself.
But this goes back to what you were just talking about a few seconds with strategy. It all has to go back to strategy in a sense. No matter, it's not just the implementation portion of it.
Correct.
It's the whole run of the gamut as well. You have to think of, like you said, the issues that are in fact going to be coming. That goes back
Correct.
to the strategy station.
It's too easy for an executive to say, I set the tone and I set the strategy and they didn't deliver on it. What they're also responsible for is ensuring that delivery is on pace, that they have clear goals, that there is stakeholder alignment, that there's not that level of infighting, that the organizational change and the communication for everything from status of the project to what it's attempting to do to what's going to change as a result of it and the implications, that's something that the senior stakeholders own, right? And that's the part of hoeing down the trees before the project team runs into them and paving that way for them that's really important. And I think what we talk about in Kyle's point there is that needs to also fall on the agency when you're evaluating a product or you're trying to go and implement a project, that the agency that you have to help you through this, you should also judge it, how are they at that? How are they at helping raise some potential conflicts and risks to you and all that stuff, and helping you to kind of foresee the challenges as they've run into them and before in many other organizations. You've got to be able to tap into that experience because you're not the first one to take any of this on.
All right, so the next thing, the last news item that we're going to go ahead and talk about, talks about personas. This is something that you actually mentioned a little bit earlier, Scott. In September 18th, Laura McNabb, actually a contributing author working out of New York City, posted an article on CMS Wire about user personas. And in the article, she states, if you're building an interactive experience or redesigning an existing one, there's one thing you can't get away from. That's personas. So what is a persona? According to Lori, a persona takes business goals and gives them life. It's personification. In the business goals, it keeps the true user top of mind. So Scott, how does one go about building up a persona? And who should actually be creating the persona when you actually dig a little deeper into it?
Yeah, and I think if we take a step back, again, kind of constantly becomes a theme about everything that we're doing here. Every show that we have, whether we're talking about mobile and the notion of mobile first we talked about, and my take on that when we had Ian Truscott on board, my take on that was what I liked about the notion of responsive design is it puts you in a position to have to be thinking about what your audience is coming to you for. Why are they on your site? What are they trying to accomplish? And so therefore, when you think about mobile, you're thinking about, okay, what are they doing on that iPad and what should I then show them when they're using that experience? Everything comes back, globalization, you could take that in all the shows that we've had, that audience centricity is the point. And it's been around when I was in the services business even 15 years ago when I was a project manager, we were building personas at the time. And so as Lori says in this article, what a persona is it's a personification of your audience. And you're going to have multiple personas. So you literally name, okay, Mary Jane is a 35-year-old, woman. She's coming to our site because she cares about buying, clothes for her kids. And you put yourself in that mindset. I've actually seen, and you use it through the course of when you're doing design, when you're putting out product releases and features, when you're updating your site. You're then mindful of all of your different personas who are representative of the stakeholders in your audience, and making sure that you're kind of getting in their heads about how are they going to view what you've done.
Forrester Research, we've had them on a couple different times. One of the things that they actually do, they have cardboard cutouts of Gail, of different random people throughout the office trying to showcase exactly who this persona is. So you're constantly reminded, and your company, the folks in your corporation, are constantly reminded of who that persona actually is, who your target audience is. Because I think that's the one thing we have to remember. Persona, or you could just call it your target market, your target person that you're actually going after in a sense.
That's right. And someone like a Forrester has taken it, where now their entire website is gleamed around that, about kind of which of our 3 views of you do you fit in? Problem with that is when you don't fit in one of those 3, then you feel like where otherwise the actual content could be pretty valuable to you, you feel like, okay, wait, this isn't really for me, and so you kind of eject. So there's some challenges with that as well if you get it wrong. But the notion of user-centered design, and like you even said, I've had situations where clients literally have team meetings on a weekly basis and they have 4 seats that are empty that have, the persona sitting in front of them, that they actually act as if they're in the meeting with them and ask for their point of view, so to speak, about what it is and try to look at things through their lens. So I think it's a great idea. It's certainly nothing new, but it's a relevant article because we forget about some of these basics. And so for marketers who haven't necessarily taken on in the past, IT projects to build stuff or whatever, maybe user-centered design hasn't been, but I think they're pretty mindful folks. So this is just another tool in your toolkit to figure out, take what you know about your audience, maybe merge that with some data about your audience, and put them together into the form of a persona.
So there you have it, folks. That right there is the news. We are, in fact, going to be moving on right now and get to the main topic of our show today, and that is, in fact, big data. Now, according to IBM, every day we create 2.5, I love this number, quintillion bytes of data. That number is just mind-blowing, to say the least. No, so much that 90% of the data in the world today has actually been created within the last 2 years alone. And that data is big data. I mean, you're seeing it right here on CMS Connected, being video, things like that. Social media is also a major contributing factor to this. So with all that in mind, really, joining us in studio to help make sense of big data, and the founder and president of Bluebill Advisors, welcome in Frank Gilbane. Frank, welcome in. How are you doing today?
Great, Tyler. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So enterprises are awash. Data's growing. Crazy. I mean, I was actually just at a big data conference last week, and seeing the amount of data that's just skyrocketing is just incredible. So how are these organizations and IT leaders itself dealing with the ever-increasing volume, variety, velocity, I mean, all of the above information that forms big data, really?
Well, they worry a lot about it. That's about it. Well, actually, big data has been around for a while, and there's no real definition for the term, no agreed-upon definition, but the consensus seems to be to define it around the characteristics of technology that's used for managing it. So, the people who really have brought this to the forefront over the last few years have been Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Amazon, people like that. So they are doing something with it. And it's not just them, there are also companies on Wall Street that have been doing things for a long time, and so on. But it hasn't hit the mainstream yet. And what's happening now, or starting to happen, is that the technology is becoming available for it to hit the mainstream. And it's, I'm not familiar with all the numbers from IDC and Forrester and Gartner, but I know it's pretty dramatic what's going on. I think Forrester actually predicted that the number of prototype Hadoop installations in enterprises was going to go up by a factor of 10 this year. So that's how dramatic it's going to be. But there's a lot of confusion still. People don't really know what they should do about it, how it affects them, how they're going to handle the IT infrastructure challenges. And of course, one of the biggest limitations has been the lack, that everybody's aware of, is the lack of skills, statistics, computing, and the ability to analyze the information that you're getting. You get overwhelmed very easily. I know you're going to be talking to Rob later. He made an important point recently in a blog post about marketers have trouble dealing with all the data they already have, and we do too. I know I do with my own data, but and that's very true. And they're not the only ones. A lot of big companies are also having that problem.
So who should who should be worried about it? Because I can see all kinds of uses for this. I mean,
right.
we just got Osama bin Laden, I'm sure, to go find that it might be an awful lot of mining of data that went into something like that. So I can see lots of places where you might be able to use it, but I'm trying to figure out who, in terms of your kind of average company profile, role, that sort of stuff, should be concerned about this. Should the average, I mean, it's on the cover of Harvard Business Review for October, right? And there's a few really good articles in there. But I get the impression that because it's making the cover, that there's a sense of worry because they're being told to worry about it. Who should worry about it?
Okay. So there are lots of different ways that it can and will be used in the future. So the answer is really kind of different depending on what your role is, what kind of company you are, and what your role is within the company. Mm-hmm. So sort of working from the broader perspective and working in, you've got all kinds of everything from health information, the fact that the health information that's actually collected in the hospital, speaking of videos, gets thrown out because there's no way to manage it. And if all of that had actually was kept and able to be analyzed, then it would be much easier to find, have more evidence-based medicine because you'd have more evidence, right? Mm-hmm. So there's one, the Hadron Collider, and we found the Bogues. Well, we think we found the Higgs boson, but anyway, that's the data there is amazing. So there are scientific and there are medical things. So in that sense, researchers need to be, in the big research companies. Sort of for a more normal enterprise, or if you think of anybody who deals with information, whether you're a publisher or whether you sell it.
Oh, that narrows it for me.
Yeah, right. Well, I know.
Anyone who deals with information.
Yeah. So, well, let's start with the commercial information. Okay, so people actually make a living with it.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So the first thing to notice about that is that there are all kinds of opportunities for new businesses. I mean, people who sell information, it could be anything from weather information to data about tolerances for machine parts or whatever it is. But all of that data is going to explode. The amount of it is going to explode. So if you're in that business, the information you're providing now to your customers is not going to be sufficient. And there are opportunities, one, to increase the information you can provide your companies and you can provide your customers, both in terms of the data itself and the interpretation of it, because a lot of companies aren't going to be ready for that. So there are new potential businesses. There's also a lot of free data out there that can be incorporated into your products. Mm-hmm. So if you go to data.gov, for example, or look at Google Public Data has a whole bunch of resources. And there are people starting to look at that and package it and resell it in different ways. So there's another case. Now getting back more home, so to speak, to the world that we come from, if you're a marketer, working with trying to market whatever kind of product it is, you've got, we know everybody's got the challenge of their own web analytics, but that's only part of it. So first of all, people have to get better at it, because I know even in our own case, with our conference, we send out emails and we look at the statistics coming back, opens and you look at it and you think, well, let's see. Why is that happening? Is it because of this or is it because of that? And there are so many variables that it's easy to confuse yourself. So there's a lot of work to figure out how to deal with all of that. So, so two things are going to happen. One is there are going to be services to provide that. So big data as a service and big data analytics as a service, those kinds of things are going to be available to help companies analyze the information that they already have. Secondly, the data that you have yourself is not all you need or all you want. You want to go out and buy, if you're measuring, say, you have a consumer product and you're measuring, both views of it, perspectives about different products, or whatever. You can go out and buy information that's much bigger than you could ever get with your own audience.
So so one point is the fact that the undeniable fact that there is a lot of data out there. Right? I mean, the definition of big data, as I've read about it, is like you say. There's no specific pinpointing about how much data is big data, but we're talking about petabytes and exabytes of data. That basically the point is it becomes big data when it's too big for a relational database to handle. Right.
That's the way
for
a lot
the
of
most
people
part.
look
Right.
at it.
But my question, so there's a lot of data out there. My question, though, is around, I mean, if I'm going to wear the cynic hat, which I tend to do, as you've pointed out on this show, what's wrong with sampling, which is what we've always done? Or the notion, we're in political heat right now, and they'll tell you who's winning the race one day or the next by talking to 400 people, and they give you the plus or minus or whatever. Would it be any better if we captured all the data for every possible voter in the world on a minute-by-minute basis about whether they're changing their mind?
Right.
Would the reflection on that about who's winning the race at any given time be any better than polling 400 people?
Right.
And to the point that it matters.
That's right. Well, that's a good question, and I think it depends on the data set and what you're actually trying to find out. But one of my favorite quotes is the founder and chairman of SAS. And I was at a conference The Economist put on.
Dr. Goodnight.
Yeah, Dr. Goodnight. I was at a conference, he was speaking at a conference that The Economist put on a year ago, and I was there. And he said, I might not get the words exactly right, and he said, the most... the best part about all of this is that we don't need. Why would you need to sample when you have all the data? And so, his statement was basically a big hurrah for the fact that we might not always need to sample. But I think, as you suggest, you didn't actually say it, but I think you were meant to suggest that sampling is actually good enough for lots of things,
right.
and I think that's true. So I think it really depends. I mean, sampling I guess it depends how. But you care about the politics,
Back to the use case.
Yeah, exactly. So for the Higgs boson, you've got to have the right amount. And another practical example is if you look at of good enough is look at things like Google Translate. We just we can't. There aren't enough rules that people can come up with to come up with good algorithms for machine translation. But if you add statistical results in there,
we talked about this in the last show as well.
So, if you add statistical results in there, like Google does with Google Translate, and other people, not just Google, I should say, then all of a sudden it gets good enough. The machine translation gets good enough for lots of applications. You can find out the basic information. It's not for a health decision or in a court of law. I mean, there are lots of
exactly. So it's about that scenario, it's about the use case, that sort of stuff.
Right.
You mentioned quickly, just to allow you to get a plug, you talked about your conference quickly. When's that coming up, and is this going to be a topic there?
Sure. Yes, it's coming, well, first of all, it's coming up in the end of November, the week after Thanksgiving.
It's the Gilbane Conference.
The Gilbane Conference, thank you. It's in Boston at the Intercontinental Hotel. There are 2 days, the 28th and 29th are full conferences and exhibits, and some in-depth workshops the day before.
Great.
In terms of big data, we are covering it. I've been one of the things that I try and do at the conference is to push ahead a little bit. We spent, as you know, being track chair for the web content management and the customers and engagement track, we focus on helping people deal with what they need to deal with today. That's really we want them to be right out front, but not too far out front. That's what most of the conference is about. But with the keynotes, what we try and sprinkle in the conference is a little bit of a look ahead. So big data is one of those topics that I kind of force fit into the conference last year. And I actually force fit a couple of sessions, but in fact, it turned out to come up on its own all the way through the conference. This year, we actually have 6 presentations. I posted about it yesterday on a
Okay.
blog post, actually.
Okay.
So if you're interested in big data, there are 6. 2 of them are specifically on big data in marketing. There's one speaker from GE who's going to be talking about a more broader approach, idea, and there are a couple of skeptical presentations on
Naysayers.
big data. So yes, we will be covering it.
Great.
Among all of the other things that we cover.
And information at gilbaneboston.com for that.
That's right, gilbaneboston.com.
Great.
Excellent. Frank, honestly, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Great stuff.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you,
See
sir.
you guys later.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely love it. So we are going to take a very quick break, but when we return, we're going to be joined by Robert Rose from Digital Clarity Group, as well as we'll have Sitecore in the spotlight, and of course, we'll have Rapid Fire with Scott Lewer. All that coming up more in just a few seconds.
Businesses today demand a powerful web content management and online marketing platform that can provide the best value at an affordable price with unlimited website possibilities. Kentico, the .NET Enterprise Marketing Solution and web content management platform of choice, powers more than 12,000 websites in over 84 countries, which means you get a stable, well-tested solution. Fully loaded with over 350 web parts and controls and more than 80 extensible modules. Kentico provides you with a fully integrated solution for building your online presence and running successful online marketing campaigns. It allows you to quickly launch an effective B2B or B2C site, intranet, online store, or branded online community, fully integrated with Facebook and Twitter. Organizations need to be more effective at catering to the personalities of their site visitors and the way they consume information. Sites need to more dynamically adjust to each site visitor to optimize their experience. Kentico EMS delivers a complete customer experience management platform that provides all of the necessary capabilities for interactive marketing, from planning and conception through optimization and execution. And lastly, analysis. Gain the insight required to analyze your marketing performance. Align the content, execution, and analytics critical for successful interactive campaigns, speeding delivery, and optimizing return on investment. With a fully integrated set of online marketing tools, Kentico EMS can improve your online marketing efforts, which allows you to focus on what's important, making your business successful. Test drive Kentico EMS today to get a complete appreciation of all its powerful features and capabilities.
Welcome back into CMS Connected here on the Pulse Network, everyone. I am Tyler Piper. Big thanks to Frank Gilbane for taking time out of his day to jump on the show with us. But we're continuing our discussion all about big data. Now, it continues to be the topic not only of just this show and this discussion, but the hype, and companies have been pioneering ways to really analyze big data, how to integrate it with traditional data, and finding that the benefits, they're real, actually. Joining us via Skype right now to discuss some of these benefits, Robert Rose from Digital Clarity Group. Robert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing very well, thank you. So, you and I have actually, we've talked about this just a few weeks ago on a previous show, but Frank actually touched upon, how companies are handling big data solutions. So let's kind of dive in just a little bit deeper right now to a subject that you're very familiar with. Let's talk about the Chief Marketing Officer, the CMO, and how they're reacting towards the idea and the whole concept of big data, really. For CMOs that have yet to take the plunge, where does one really start, and how do you go about it, I guess I should say?
Right. Well, I think Frank said it well in the previous segment when he said that everybody's worried a lot about it, right? They've got Scott held up the Harvard Business Review, and the CMO has his office, and the CEO walks in and slaps that magazine down on the desk and goes, okay, now where are we with big data? And so the CMO has got to start to deal with that. I think there's 2 interesting challenges here. One is the big data challenge, and the other is the big data opportunity. We've got 2 sort of points of view on this, and where we tend to focus is this big data challenge, right? And this is what the CMO is constantly worried about, and it's what I touch on in my blog post when I talked about the ideas that, we're not even really good at what we have right now, much less tomorrow's next big thing of big data. So let's figure out how we use analytics right before we actually start to attempt to start analyzing big data. And the point of fact is that most companies don't have a big data problem. They have a little bit of data problem, and they're just never going to have enough data to really have a big data problem, which brings us to the big data opportunity, which is as Frank touched on, there's a lot of different ways that vendors are now starting to package data that are being generated by external systems, everything from online advertising to the social listening to all sorts of persona data, as you guys touched on earlier, all kinds of data that can be brought in from third parties that truly is big data that might be able to append things that we're doing and give us some sort of differentiating advantage. And that's going to be the big data opportunity for CMOs to look at in the future. And I think what you're going to start to see is a lot of startups really start to market themselves as providing marketers at all kinds of organizations the idea that big data can be some sort of differentiating factor and start to apply that to what they're doing from a product or service standpoint. So from a getting started standpoint, it's starting to look at how can big data, maybe not necessarily where we can make efficiencies in our own analytics, and I think that's a whole other topic, but how can we start to look at big data being generated all over the internet and use that as a differentiating factor in what we're doing in offering our own product and service.
Hey, Robert, Scott here. So, so in the article that you talked about, I think your point is extremely relevant, but Andrew McAfee makes a point that basically, I think he said 5 to 6% increased profitability and performance for companies that are making use of big data. My question about that is, I have a challenge with that because I think there's an awful lot of other things culturally, just organizationally, that have to also be involved for those 5 to 6% of the, for those companies that are making use of that, and that it's that culture that might be the reason for those guys getting that improved performance more so than the fact that they happen to use big data itself. Talk to me a little bit about the culture of a marketer, being metric driven. Talk to me a little bit about that. Is this going to be completely like, a shock?
Yeah, I mean, are you suggesting that large organizations are kind of siloed and might be proprietary about the data that they hold in their department? I'm shocked at that, Scott.
I wouldn't say such a thing.
Yeah, so of course, yes. It's, this is one of the biggest, I mean, there's a lot of challenges I have with that article, not the least of which is the continued use of the overused, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it sort of paradigm, which just gets so, well, anyway, I'll get off topic on that. But the whole idea of culture is a huge thing, driving change. You guys touched on earlier where you touched on the fact that there's this gap, again, arguable about how wide it is between strategy and execution. And I can tell you from the work that I've done with large organizations that the execution part of that is in large case because we don't have clarity of purpose. Mm-hmm. And so the execution across different silos, whether it's the different silos that even exist within marketing, PR versus brand marketing, product marketing versus demand gen marketing, the e-business team, the social CRM team, all of those teams have proprietary states on what they're doing with their data and the metrics that they have to comply with. Then we start bringing in things like IT and finance and the CRM system and all of those data, and not just the technology. The technology is actually relatively easy to sort out, but the culture and the processes that we're going to use to de-silo those things and pull all that together so that it actually makes sense and that we can actually have what Dr. Goodnight talked about, having all of the data, that's a real challenge.
Yeah. So I was going to say, Frank was actually just talking about this a few moments ago when he said, big data means a little something for each individual group, really. So one of the things I'm actually anxious to kind of get your opinion on is for the effects, because when marketers and CMOs will actually sit there and will say, okay, what are the effects that I will actually see from big data from the positive standpoint? What are the results I'm going to be able to see?
Yeah, and I think there's a big TBD there, right? I think as McAfee said in the article, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I've heard absolutely great, wonderful case studies where large organizations have pulled large data sets and gotten differentiating ideas for new products and new services or efficiencies in what they're already providing. There was a wonderful case study. I was at a conference in Denver about a month ago, and a guy talked about a telephone company that actually pulled all of the transactional data from their customer service department and found out if they would just start to reward employees for offering up a listening for cues about life changes. We're moving, my kids going to college and those types of things that they could actually off and resell and upsell customers at a larger degree. And they would be a huge supporting data point for what McAfee talks about, including that 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever % of revenue increase by utilizing big data effectively. But I think for right now, the real opportunity is going to be the unknown. What is it that we can start to look at as new vendors start to crop up, because they certainly will, and how can CMOs start to utilize data that's being generated not from them but from third parties that can be used to enhance things that they're already doing, which I think is going to be a huge competitive differentiator if used properly.
Excellent. Love it. Robert, honestly, thank you so much for taking time out of the day. Really appreciate it. Always run out of time. It's the way it works every single time. But honestly, thanks so much. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
Of course, without question. That right there, Robert Rose of Digital Clarity Group. So we're going to have to move on, and we're going to go into the spotlight right now. It's become one of the favorite segments here on CMS Connected. Now, in today's In the Spotlight segment, we have Sitecore. Now, Sitecore is recognized industry leader in web content management. We actually just saw them in the quadrant. We talked about them a little bit earlier, in digital marketing software. Now, Sitecore's customer engagement platform is one of the first e-business platforms to cohesively integrate web content management with a comprehensive digital marketing system that includes marketing automation, email marketing system, real-time web experience management, web engagement analytics, e-commerce, marketing optimization, social media integration, campaign management, and really just a whole heck of a lot more. So we're going to have Steve Medvey of Falcon Software on in just a few minutes. But so before we get to that, Scott, well, let's actually reverse the roles a little bit here. This will probably be a little bit easier. Sure. Give me your kind of thoughts on Sitecore. Sure. Just we'll get to Stephen from the platform side, but I want to talk to you more about the business, them as a business themselves. Kind of give me your opinions on that.
Sure thing. A little overview on Sitecore. So there's a couple. It's interesting. I was just having these conversations with a client this past week. Couple of schools of thought generally in this space. One is the kind of best of breed, where they say a web content management vendor says, we're going to do web content management, we're going to do it solidly well, and any kind of peripheral capability, we're going to be open to integrating with those. And then there's the kind of like the folks who expand the fences of web content management into other appropriate areas, similar areas, related areas, analytics, marketing automation, things like that. Sitecore is of the school of thought of the latter. So for them, it's become far more than just web content management. They're doing things like marketing automation. They have what they call their whole digital marketing suite. I fear that they've changed the name of that now. But either way, it is a digital marketing suite is what it allows you to do. To both collect information from the audience, talked about that user centricity, who's looking at you, how can you make the information that you've got in your repository relevant to them, make those decisions in real time, both on explicit and implicit data, and that you can be able to do all the core things of web content management as well on top of that. As a company, they're growing year over year. They continue to get more and more accolades. I think whether it's from the Quadrant or from Forrester, I think they're leading on the wave as well. They're definitely kind of one of the hotter commodities now. They're not one of your large platforms. It's the .NET platform, which Stephen will tell you about, but they're not one of the kind of big mammoths. Everybody's wondered for a long time, who's going to buy them? Is Microsoft going to buy them? They're kind of always in the news from that standpoint. I think they're building, they also just took in the last, about a year ago, maybe a little bit more now, they took some funding. So they've took on now some capital. And who knows what they're going to do with that. I think they made one semi-purchase. It wasn't really a full purchase, but they took kind of a minority, but a large stake in a company. We just talked about that last month or the month before, which is the first time we've seen Sitecore do that. One of their claims to fame is we've built everything kind of from the ground up. It all works really well together, that sort of thing. And that was kind of the first time they started to go away from that a little bit. So I don't know. The thing is interesting with Sitecore is kind of what's their roadmap going forward and what are they going to do now that they've got some extra money, whatever, go IPO maybe. So we'll see.
All right. So there you have it. That's them from the business standpoint. Let's take a little bit deeper look into the platform itself. So for that, we welcome in Stephen Medvey from Falcon Software. Stephen, welcome in. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Great show, by the way, and it's great to be back.
Excellent. Of course, as always. So we're going to open up the questions the same way we pretty much always do with you. Kind of what's your overall impression with Sitecore at this point in time right now?
Good question. Sitecore is an outstanding web CMS solution, and it really can create that dynamic experience through personas that Scott and you have mentioned earlier. If you're an organization that needs to leverage your large multiple digital channels to create this highly a connected digital ecosystem so that you can become an industry leader, you're really looking for Sitecore. Sitecore is about delivering those maximum results. This could be through an engaged customer experience that gives users personalized content through those digital channels your company has already established. It could be utilizing those e-business tactics that you're creating to deliver conversion activities within that experience to drive maximum results. It could even be just integrating those siloed channels you have currently to be able to have a more streamlined operation experience. Sitecore, it's a very mature product that always delivers on value.
Excellent. Love it. So let's move on. What I want to talk to you about now is some of the features and benefits really of Sitecore. Now, it seems pretty much that you agree with Gartner Group's positioning of Sitecore as the strongest leader with the Magic Quadrant. Now, what are those features that really do make Sitecore the leader, according to Gartner, really?
So let's talk about what Sitecore dubs the Sitecore Customer Engagement Platform. This integrates their content management system with Sitecore's digital marketing system to deliver more meaningful engagement, personalized web experience for your customers. So first of all, you have to understand how content is served up in Sitecore. It is different from most other CMS products on the market today. You don't just create a piece of content for the desktop, then recreate the content for, say, an Android phone, and then have to recreate it again for your iPhone. You create what's called one content object, and then you manipulate that object, whether it's a text, image, PDF, a report, a form, it doesn't really matter. That stored content object can be called up to be viewed in any form and show as much or as little information that is needed, and then be served up on any device just by manipulating that specific content object. So this is where you can have different content served up based on where you are located, perhaps in Alaska, or where you entered from. It could be Google, which other CMS solutions have, but with Sitecore you can deliver a unique experience based on what content object that user has clicked on, or what content object that user has downloaded or previously downloaded, because you can work with that content object and you can define a persona attribute which will deliver a customized experience. Now that's going to facilitate overall lead generation, and it's really going to improve a company's marketing effectiveness and that bottom line. So Sitecore's other really large advantage is the ability to create, update, pull, push content from almost any external repository or application you can think of. You can build a page by integrating different content objects that could be served up through. So I'll give you an example. Say you have specific product documents, spec sheets in SharePoint. You have a brochure overview that's created in Adobe InDesign. You have product reviews in Twitter. Say you have many people have already bought the item and you get that, you have that information in Salesforce. You can push all that data on one page, and then you can edit it either through Sitecore or through the application one time. And you don't have to duplicate that content, and you can manage it any way you want.
Excellent. So, Steve, the last question I basically have for you, this has been great so far up to this point. Appreciate it as always as well. So the last one, any final thoughts on Sitecore? Any final comments, really?
So Sitecore's pricing is extremely flexible in terms of what your needs are within each edition they provide. There are multiple sticking points your organization is going to have to consult with a Sitecore rep on. This could be many authoring. You could have many authoring servers. You could need development servers, standby servers. How many concurrent editors are you going to need to maintain the site? Do you need the online marketing suite? Do you need web form for marketers, that email campaign manager? Perhaps you need Microsoft Dynamics CRM campaign integration, or you could need the Microsoft SharePoint connector module. Excuse me. Pricing is really based on licensing editions. It's loosely based on that. It could be their enterprise, the professional, the primary. It could be based on the site license options. You know, typically the enterprise solution typically begins at about 100K, but it's best to get these licensing fees directly from Sitecore themselves, since they do not publish their prices and are extremely guarded when it comes to partners blurting out numbers on formats like CMS Connected.
Love it. Steven, honestly, thank you so much as always. Great stuff, and I'm sure we'll be catching up soon, right?
So my overall opinion of Sitecore is this. I have been working for many years with companies such as Falcon Software, that I work for now, that help organizations choose the best fit CMS solution. And when Sitecore has been selected, I can say this with confidence. I have never, ever heard anyone ever say we made the wrong choice.
Excellent. I love it. Steven, good stuff. We'll see you again next month, correct?
Thank you.
Excellent. That right there, folks. Steven Medvey of Falcon Software. Good stuff as always. We do, in fact, have to move on to the rapid fire segment with Scott Lewer. We got to really be rapid with these ones today as far as time is concerned. So let's first start off. Let's put the timer on the clock. And Scott, I want to talk about Episerver and behavioral merchandising. That's the new dimension now available for Episerver Commerce. Give me your thoughts on that.
So yeah, being really quickly, I guess we have the full minute anyway. So yeah, so Episerver has made a lot of, so basically here's what we're talking about. The notion of web content management systems continually expanding into other areas. This has been a theme of the show today. It's been a theme of the show for the past couple of months. Episerver's most recent partnership with Aptus is just another example of them, in this case, moving towards e-commerce. They've shown other signs of doing this in the past, though. They recently bought MediaChase, which they had been working with for a very long time. MediaChase was the underpinnings of Episerver Commerce for quite some time. And this is now the Aptus. What that brings to them is the ability to do things that are kind of Amazon-like. The whole notion of what are the top sellers, managing your navigation, the did you mean capabilities, all that stuff to basically make the content that much more relevant to the context and the searches that people are doing. And when you're talking about commerce, it's extremely important and pays significant conversion dividends.
Okay, we want to move on. Let's talk about Oracle and their results for Q1 were not very good. But Scott, do you really read into too much of these unimpressive results or no?
Look, Oracle never has that impressive of results. Part of that has to do with how they, what they tell the street in terms of their expectation setting. And then the other thing is just that they're not moving a whole ton, right? I mean, to even Oracle's acquisition not so long ago, I guess about a year and a half ago, of a web content management vendor, that didn't really move the needle for them much at all. It was a very small piece of what Oracle does. They're a huge behemoth. I think the notable things out of this is for them their emphasis and continued emphasis on cloud. I think $1.6 billion of their numbers there were related to their cloud services. And so I think I'm interested in listening to Oracle Open World coming up, where they're going to be talking about their kind of infrastructure as the service. And it's just, once again, like HP, like Adobe, like the others, they're kind of, again, moving services to the cloud. That impacts a whole lot. It impacts their bottom line revenue. It's a subscription model, all that stuff. But it's interesting to see, and I think we have to set new expectations for ourselves.
Now, everybody can agree that change is a tough thing to do, especially when it comes to a content management system. Scott, what are some tips and tricks to teach the new CMS to employees?
So this is a really, I got caught looking to the side there. This is common. Look, we alluded to really quickly to training earlier. As a part of your overall rollout, I think it's a huge part of organizational change and the management of that. I think we should never underestimate the fact that people look at web content management systems, and I think they have too high expectations. They say, they want something they don't ever have to actually train in. Well, that's really valuable, I think, for the folks who are going to be your once in a great while, completely decentralized model. I just want to be able to post something up. But for your users who are really driving most of your content, who are your people who are doing your content marketing and putting stuff into the system constantly, we really have to have an understanding not only that they're trained technically in the system, but they're trained to do things in a similar manner and their processes are similar to each other. So I think that's really key and important, and you should look to your vendors to provide that training for you, both your product vendors as well as your agency and services vendor, who much better understand your implementation, because they will differ significantly.
All right, let's talk about Hippo. It seems like we talk about them all the time. Hippo, the open source Java CMS company, has announced continued record growth. Scott, what's driving this impressive growth at this point in time?
Look, open source is, we've said it for a long time that open source is being accepted more and more. I love Hippo's model, the notion of the commercial open source vendor, where you've got somebody who's driving your roadmap and is driving your product development platform and what's moving forward. Certainly there's a community around it. Hippo has a very nice, lively community, actually, who are contributing back features, but it's a core group who are deciding, does it meet our standards? Does it meet our architectural standards? Does it fit in with what we're trying to do as an organization? And using the kind of power of the folks to help them to innovate. I think what we're seeing is a couple of things. Number one is they're expanding their market, so they are really making a big push into the US. I think that's being reflected in their numbers. They're expanding into different verticals. We've seen a fair amount of them in the EDU space, where I was just looking at them recently, and a number of other verticals where they're making traction. And then just overall, open source is getting a decent name, and these guys, architecturally, it's a very sound product.
Now, the CIA, obviously one of the more secure companies out there. In-Q-Tel, the venture investment firm of the CIA, actually entered an agreement with Huddle to develop a secure vision of content collaboration for U.S. agencies. Scott, who is Huddle? How have they positioned themselves so well right now?
Sure. So Huddle is one of those, they're actually very well known over in Europe, but surprisingly, as my colleague Tim Walters points out, who covers this collaboration area, they don't tend to come up in many of the quadrants and graphs, and I think that has to do, with their marketing. They might need some help there, to be honest, because it's a great platform for collaboration and sharing. They've obviously been able to convince the CIA from a security standpoint that you can use our platform on which to collaborate and build, and we all know from mistakes that are pretty relevant in the past that they could use some collaboration and some document sharing, not only within the CIA, but maybe amongst a number of those groups. So I think Huddle is, to answer the question, Huddle is, it's a platform for enterprise collaboration and sharing knowledge. It's much like a Box, much like a, now Salesforce is entering into this with their Chatterbox as well. We're hearing visions, so they're getting some more competition. So marketing will be key for them, but a solid product, and certainly the CIA has done their due diligence.
All right, Salesforce basically releasing Chatterbox. EMC is going to be purchasing Simplicity, and Microsoft, they're going out and getting Yammer. It's a fight going on in the cloud. I love it.
The cloud collaboration battle, as this segment has talked about, is a pretty significant one. I just alluded to that. So you've got Box, albeit BoxWorks, little plug for them, is going on in early October. That's out in San Francisco. So they're huge in the space. They're one of the first innovators. Then, as you say, EMC got into this with Simplicity. By purchasing Simplicity, the ability to have multiple people contributing their documents into the cloud and managing that in a way across all of your devices is extremely important and relevant. That what I can get on my desktop versus what I can get on my mobile and all that I can get all of access to my documents and data anywhere and share that within the group and folks that I want to. So that's really the wave. It hasn't replaced the notion of enterprise content management. It's kind of the typical age-old document management systems are starting to become kind of behemoths for kind of really pure standpoint. This is really kind of the wave of where things are at. Salesforce jumping into that is all that much more validation to the whole idea.
Good stuff. I love it. We ran through that.
We did get
I
through
dig
that.
it. We got through it all.
I did a little thing. That counter is a little bit slow. I timed it one time. It's like 1 minute and 9 seconds each one.
You're
Actually,
totally lying, because it's actually fast, believe it or not.
well, today maybe it was speed up
Yeah,
for me.
so we
but-
actually made sure we had some fun with it. That's my fault. All right, that's a great show as always. That'll do it for us today here on CMS Connected. Before we go, I want to remind you, make sure to check out cms-connected.com for details on the very next CMS Connected. It's going to be all about social media. Is your organization really ready for the new business frontier? So make sure to take a look at that. We want to bring you up on that. Finally, I'd like to thank both of our sponsors, Falcon Software as well as Digital Clarity Group. And on behalf of my co-host, Scott Lewer, and special guests today, Frank Gilbane, Robert Rose, and Stephen Medvey. I am Tyler Pyburn. Looking forward to seeing you guys in October. We'll see you next time right here on CMS Connected. Have a good one.